All right. Well, Amy, happy Tuesday afternoon. And it is wonderful to be here with you this afternoon. And I'm really excited for the conversation today, but I'm also excited about what you're kicking off here with a series of conversations on taking stock. And just real appreciation to you and others at the Association of Public Data Users for hosting this in the coming week to really understand what's going on in the public data and evidence ecosystem. So, of course, you need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so, with appreciation, you're of course the president of the for the Association of Public Data Users. I'm going to call it APDU from here on out, like everybody else does. And you're also, of course, the research professor at the Massive Data Institute and executive director of the Research Data Center at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy. Across all of that and other affiliations that I've left out here, you work on data governance, record linkage, and privacy-preserving technologies. And that really positions you extremely well for the conversation we're going to have today. And so, as you well know, much has been changing in the past several months. There's many conversations underway about the impact of policy changes on the data and evidence ecosystem. And today, we're here to simply take stock, discuss what's been happening, situate ourselves in history, which was a wonderful invitation that you and the team suggested, and also just lift up with some of the opportunities and some of the challenges this might all imply. So, of course, you are perfect to kick this series off because you are in so many conversations in any given week, particularly at the federal level, and you have a unique perspective on all of this. So I just want to get started. Jump right in. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
All right. So let's jump in. Let's get started and take stock. So what changes or trends are you seeing in social sector evidence building and the larger data ecosystem today?
People are really nervous about the data. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of frustration because information is visible or invisible. Information is potentially threatened due to changes in agencies or changes in programs. So there's just this fear that what you had relied on is not going to be available. And then there are already people suffering from disruptions of data series that they had grown reliant on. So just this general unsettled feeling about how the expectations that we had now need to be updated because it's just a different world.
So talk to me a little bit about some of these disruptions that you're seeing. In the past, we've talked about programmatic data and statistical data and things that are related to program stopping versus also things that are related to just stopping data collection because of human resource issues. So let me hear a little bit more from you about that.
Sure. We care a lot about the federal statistical system and the changes that are happening there as there are disruptions across federal agencies and departments. And so some of that is driven by staffing changes, whether people have resigned or are leaving early. The gaps that exist in those agencies are going to affect operations, whether that's data collection or data processing or data publication, or even supporting users downstream. When you look at some of the changes that have happened at CDC, you see that the comms office has largely been riffed. So there aren't people that are really going to be updating the website or answering user questions if there is some sort of hiccup in the way that data had been disseminated. And we're taking a pretty broad view of data here. It could be parameters, it could be microdata, it could be a statistical series, it could be a survey. That information with the disruption to contracts and staffing, people are very apprehensive.
So, one of the things that I've taken away from conversations with you is it's taking stock of the data is also taking stock of the human resource that takes care of that data. And so, even if you're not making a policy change, you can disrupt a data flow just by having folks that are not able to be there to communicate about it or to collect it.
Indeed. And a lot of smaller agencies relied on others to collect their data. And so when the contracts were disrupted, that means that you might not have that flow of data coming in. There have also been instances where the people that manage the contracts have been let go, but the contracts are still in effect. So it's this change of expectations from the way that we expected the system to work.
So that's a big shift right now, and we're going to get into a little bit of okay, like where to from here, but where are the sort of opportunities and challenges in the middle of all of that? So we're in the middle of it right now, but let's rewind the clock a little bit. And I think one of the more interesting invitations here by this set of Taking Stock series is, what does history have to say about this? And so I know that AppDo has been around since 1976. It's 50 years of visibility into public data and how it gets into the hands of users. And so I'm curious, both from your perspective, but also from the perspective of what you've heard about the evolution of AppDo over time. Can you situate us in history a little bit?
Sure. Well, back then, there was machine readable data for the first time, but not everybody had a computer to read said data. And there were a lot of people grappling with the same issues now that you could get the census data on a tape. And so there were groups supporting each other and pulling their resources and their knowledge in order to use that information. And that really fed the association over time. This involved some state and local county users. It involved university librarians. And so it has kind of the same composition that AppDo of today has, where we have a membership that spans academia and the information science community, a lot of government from local, state, and federal levels, and then private sector users of the data. So it's really kind of the emergence of the need to handle data that you could actually manipulate on your own takes us to the moment that we're in right now. And as I was saying before, we're in this moment of the disruption of that machine readable data, and also greatly expanded uses of that data with algorithms and machine learning and AI. So it is kind of fitting with the origin of AppDo way back then.
So we have, I mean, that actually gets us into some of the opportunities that we're seeing right now. There is the same set of innovations that were happening in 1976. I mean, not the exact same ones. We don't use UNIVAC computers anymore, right? But the massive changes and acceleration and innovations that were happening that began AppDo are happening now. And so there's a real opportunity for how we actually, and this is a large part of what you do in all of your different affiliations, but how we actually use that data. What kind of this moment that we're in, there's disruption, but there's also a lot of opportunity and promise for how we're able to use that data. I'm curious what discrete opportunities you might be observing, either at a larger picture or how what this particular environment might be affording us right now.
Right. A lot has been said about the executive order about data silos. It is addressing one of the core issues that many of us, especially in the evidence building space, had recognized, that you needed to be breaking down the silos so that you had more interoperability across programs, across departments. But we've always been focused on making sure that we're doing that responsibly, that we're paying attention to privacy and the integrity of the systems. And I think that a review of the systems in the guise of efficiency, it really is pointing out where there may have been outdated tech. And in this moment, there are also executive orders talking about regulation and deregulation. And I think that it is appropriate to assess all of the rules that get us to where we are now and to rethink them, especially if we are rethinking the systems. However, all of that has to be done with a nod to the evolution and the transparency of the system over time to make sure that we aren't creating some sharp breaks, and also to continue to have a focus on privacy, individual and group privacy, to make sure that things aren't being broken that expose people in ways that were unanticipated.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, so this I'm gonna take that and put a pause on that for when we talk about some of the downsides and some of the risks. But this opportunity that you're talking about in terms of interoperability, or in terms of being able to think across multiple data sets, that is, and you just mentioned it right now, something that we've been trying to push for a long time. It makes a lot more possible, right? And there's like simple tactical ways to use that to make sure that there's not inefficiencies or repeated payments or things like. But there's also large research that you can do with that. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about if we are able to get that interoperability or some of the outcomes of that executive order, what that might create an opportunity for.
Right. There are legal restrictions on access to data, and then there are policy restrictions, and then there are cultural restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And when I worked at the Census Bureau, it was mostly the latter. It might be legal, but that's not how we do things. And it's breaking that mindset. And for better or worse, we now have a situation where people are saying, yes, and we're just going to do it. We're just going to access these data. We have to hope that that is for appropriate legal uses and not for surveillance or illegal enforcement activities. But whenever we are knocking down those silos, you can start to have much more informed measures, looking at trends over time, looking at the outcomes of programs, looking at impact. Mm-hmm. So if there is some sort of an intervention or a policy change, being able to assess the impact of that downstream by linking administrative data, yes, it increases privacy risks, but there's so many technical and administrative controls that you can place to have guardrails to make sure that you're able to get those metrics out without harm, while minimizing the risk of harm.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so I'll put another bookmark on that to talk about that with our next question when we talk a little bit about how we might, collectively have some lookouts for some of the downsides of this. But staying with this interoperability, I was recalling a conversation that we were having with one of our Canadian colleagues who was surprised that we didn't have a Stats Canada equivalent in America, right? And so this a body and opportunity to be able to actually connect some of these larger public data sets. And so I hear some of the opportunity there into being able to do better and faster social sector research and make sure that there's efficiencies in the social ecosystem. But I'm curious if there's anything that you see that's a particular opportunity for research around that.
Right. I think that whenever you look at the current setup of the federal statistical system, there are many agencies that need to do the same activities. They do data collection. And so you have people that develop a frame and develop a questionnaire, process the data, do privacy protections, dissemination. And there may be ways to achieve economies of scale if there was more unification of the statistical activities and the supports they need to do that. I think that there could be increases in the use of privacy enhancing technologies in the way that you do data joins, perhaps not creating a warehouse with all of the data, but being able to have federated learning where the data live in their home organization, but you could get the utility by generating metrics from them while protecting privacy. I think that those sorts of innovations are hard to do agency by agency, and that looking at some centralized, organized, coordinated activity, you might be able to get there faster. And so that's an example of how this could be a moment of opportunity with all of the shifts that are occurring.
I mean, that's really exciting. So a set of activities that might lead to innovations in privacy preserving technologies, in efficiencies and opportunities from scale, and being able to answer different types of research questions that's a big opportunity. So, yeah. But now let's shift back into the other side, right? And so like some of these downsides, which you've already hinted at a little bit in terms of ensuring that those privacy preserving and legal boundaries are in place as well. Mm-hmm. But there's also a set of other ones that I'm sure that you're seeing here. What are you seeing? There's some challenges or downsides that you're looking out for?
Well, the research that you were just referring to, mm-hmm. It assumes that there are going to be data to match that have those outcome measures of interest. And we need to make sure that we aren't disrupting the pipelines for those data to exist, and making sure that we have the right funding and support and the norms of the data ecosystem to be generating this information on a timely, reliable, accurate basis. So whenever I think about we need this data to continue existing, I worry about the programs and potential policy and budget changes to the programs that generate administrative data.
Mhm.
I worry about the staffing at the organizations that run the programs that generate the administrative data. I worry about the absence of lawyers that can help with agreements that get you access to said administrative data. So it's this volatility and the risk of delay and disruption. That is where I think some of that fear and anxiety that I mentioned at the top of our conversation really come in. It's about the data availability and the loss of expertise across the federal system for the people that knew how the programs worked, where the data were coming from, kind of kept the trains running so that you had production schedules that you could rely on. And the data user community does rely on that. There is an expectation that these public goods will be coming out on schedule.
So you said something really interesting about public goods, which I'm going to pick up in just a moment. But I want to push a little bit on this. There's two things. One, just is the data going to be there? Is it going to be available? And are we able to ensure that these changes preserve what are the three the legal, practical, and cultural implications of joining things together, right? So in previous conversations, you've had this reflection on how we might collectively mitigate some of these, and you've really talked to governance. And so I'm curious if you have any reflections for folks that are sort of in this space, this space in between. We don't exactly know where everything's going to fall. Policy is shifting right now, but any thoughts about collective mitigation against some of these risks or downsides?
I think that one risk is people that are concerned about potential misuse of the data that they manage or steward. They're saying, well, should I even keep this? Should I collect this? What are we going to do with this information? And I want to make sure that we aren't going to shoot ourselves in the foot and dispose of information that really is valuable, that without knowing the different methods that could be used to protect and lock down that information. We do have an erosion of the norms that if something was legally off limits, you used to expect that it would remain untouched. Now we are kind of wondering how that holds, looking at what has happened in some federal agencies. But making sure that you know the methods available to you to protect what you have, and really thinking about a broad definition of integrity. Do you have system integrity? Do you have program integrity? Which literally improper payments and things like that. You want to make sure that you have data that you're retaining and collecting and observing over time. You want to make sure that your systems have that physical integrity as well, in terms of who is the administrative process to figure out who can get access to it. But it fundamentally, to me, comes down to organizational integrity. And we expected organizations, whether they are nonprofit or they are government, to operate with certain norms. And I want to make sure that we are all very active in making sure that there is transparency and independence and accountability whenever there are changes occurring or work being shifted around.
So
Back to that fear and anxiety, kind of.
I'm sorry?
I said, and that brings me back to the fear and anxiety somewhat.
Absolutely. And I think those are two really interesting prescriptions, which is, take a pause before stopping collecting data or throwing out a data set, but also really making sure to shore up that kind of like broad definition of integrity that comes back to the sort of data governance, the legal underpinnings. Take a moment right now and really understand that for your data sets. It's like now is a moment to really circle back to that, to make sure that as we move into a period of uncertainty, we collectively understand that as it pertains to our particular organizations or agencies, et cetera. And so I did want to pull one thing back out again, which was interesting about this role of government that you noted. It kind of brings us back a little bit to this larger vision. And then I'm going to have one more question. Then I'm going to turn to the chat for questions. So, folks, if anybody's watching the webinar right now, just an invitation to surface any questions that you'd be curious to hear from Amy about and discuss. And so we'll turn to that in just a few minutes, and then we're going to end at the half hour. So back to this opportunity that government has that is unparalleled in understanding what's happening. And I've heard you just say it, coast to coast. Let's understand what's happening coast to coast. That's a role that states, that nonprofits, that corporations can't quite fill, right? And so I'm curious if you have any reflections to that before I turn to my final question for you.
Well, one of the roles of government was to, in some cases, impose standards or reporting requirements. It was the way that we did have information brought up so that we would have that national level view, or that we collect information so that we can have these kind of benchmarks to compare against over time. And so that is something that role can't be replaced with, as you said, individual states or a company that has a lot of data, but not all of the data. I worry a lot about denominators. You like talking about incidence or prevalence whenever you talk to public health people. And that relies on knowing who is in the denominator and the characteristics of people. And that is really a federal function, to create that denominator and make it a public good so that the business community can use it, public health can use it, criminal justice, everybody can use it, because we had this expectation that it was going to be coming out regularly. We need to make sure that happens. That's part of making sure that we have that system integrity.
So yeah, preserving the denominators. I like that. I think that's an important call out, and an important call out to I've heard in some previous conversations that just nothing replaces that data set that the federal government can collect. And so preserving the denominators. I want to just turn to one last question for you, Amy, before we look to some questions from the audience. Where to next? Like, what are you working on right now? Is there anything you want to lift up that AppDo or you are doing right now as you think about this public data and evidence ecosystem?
Right. I will start with what I'm doing at Georgetown, and it's working on privacy enhancing technologies and doing demonstrations in states, because there's crazy stuff going on in the federal space. So good things are still going on in the state space, but really helping people discover different ways that they can get a lot more utility out of their data while protecting it, making sure that none of the workers or learners or other individuals in their systems have the risk of re-identification, but still getting really good information out of it. Another thing that I'm delighted to be doing through Georgetown and AppDo is launching the Federal Data Forum with the population, with PRB. Mm-hmm. And we are really excited because if you're familiar with the ACS Data Users Group, it's going to be that similar sort of community, but it's also going to be a place where you can discover all of the news that many of us are getting inundated with through articles and newsletters and interviews. It's going to be a place that has the centralization of that information, and also a place where you can ask questions and get referrals to other groups that are doing amazing work, like the Data Rescue Project or Data Lumos. These are examples of places that are helping with that data preservation activities. And so we would be able to say, if you're looking for something, try over here, because otherwise it's very overwhelming to track what's going on with all of the executive orders and reactions to them.
So that connects to, well, thank you. Amazing. I've got about 5 or 6 minutes, and so we're going to fire a few questions at you from the audience. All right, and then we're going to wrap right at the half hour for these quick, snappy conversations. But thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
So a question that connects to this last comment that you made is, so you are everywhere in all these conversations. You are in so many of them. I am. One of our listeners is curious, where do you turn first for your information about this? Like, where do you look to make sure that you are up to date? In addition to just being in conversations, are there places that you go to first? You mentioned a few right now, but I'm curious, where do you turn to when you're getting yourself up to date?
We are very fortunate that we have such an engaged and informed membership at Aptu, and many of them sit in different sectors and also at different levels in organizations, different types of organizations, and they send things that they are seeing through their professional communities, and those may be essays or blogs or uh, draft legislation or an opportunity to comment and also getting feedback on what other people are commenting on. It is the ecosystem that we live in. There are a lot of other professional organizations, the sociologists and the demographers at PAA or the American Statistical Association or APOR, which is public opinion research, public policy. It's talking to these different associations to understand how their members, what they are concerned with, and what everybody is working on. At Aptu, we are working on ways that we can help people describe what we are seeing and articulate to people that might not be as engaged in the data conversations about the risk and what they can be doing. We are working on responses to requests for information, such as the recent one about potential changes to the Privacy Act. So it's making sure that we stay engaged, but also part of that ecosystem so that we are all better mobilized to help restore any data sets that or data programs that get disrupted.
That's fantastic, and it connects directly to another question that just lifted up. And so, an invitation if there's anything more that you wanted to call out from that. I've got a question from the audience. Are there any thoughts from you or others listening about specific next steps to protect integrity and pursue opportunities, including through collective or network action? So you've just surfaced a few of them from what you just said. And so an invitation if there's anything particularly that you wanted to call out in response to that question. If not, that's fine.
There are going to be some data resources launching soon that are helping track changes to data sets, that federal data sets that people have grown used to a certain level of availability and quality. And so there are efforts now to kind of create an index of these data resources so that you'll be able to keep an eye on the ones that matter most to you. And we're also working collectively across other organizations and the friends groups like Friends of BLS or NCHS to hear about what programs might be destabilized within those agencies due to these personnel changes for now. And we're tracking the way that that will affect schedule. You know, we're watching at the Census Bureau, there have already been some changes to plan test activities for the next decennial census. It's the sort of thing that you want to keep an eye on to understand whether that's going to have operational impact for some of these just critically important data assets.
Well, that is fantastic, and we'll make sure that there's links to the resources as we wrap this and post the recording. Is there anything that you wanted to end with? I'm going to draw us to a close. We've about 2 minutes, 90 seconds. Well, who's counting that? Me.
I am delighted that you are going to be interviewing other people to get their perspectives on what's going on right now. I think it's so valuable to take stock of where we are with these changes to the data ecosystem and how that could affect evidence building moving ahead. So I really appreciate your role in this as well, Gabriel.
Well, Amy, that was a perfect setup for saying that the next one of these conversations, and thank you for that, the next one of these conversations, I'm happy to announce will be with Christina Yancey, who is the Vice President for Workforce Development in AIR. And so we're going to get a chance to see from the perspective of somebody who was previously in the federal government, but also sits at a large research institution about her perspective on the current data and evidence ecosystem. So stay tuned. We're going to come back in about 2 weeks, and we'll be hosting these conversations over the next 10 weeks at roughly an every other week cadence to continue to understand and take stock of the public data and evidence ecosystem. So that's it for now. Amy, thank you so much for kicking us off, and to be continued.
Thanks, Gabriel.